I am back, comfortably zoned radio, flying high over the zone with the zigzag man. Ralph Tyko from Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco. And Brother Scott's back. How's that? The brains of the operation. From Rockland, California, a fine place to be, but not necessarily in the summer. What'd you say the weather was today, the heat?
It's going to be triple digits by tomorrow. It might get there today, but it definitely will get there by tomorrow, so they say.
All right.
And
all right. Is there some sort of prize when it gets to triple digits?
Yeah, there's a prize for the power companies because your power bill goes up to $200 a month to stay cool.
Just to stay cool.
So there's a prize there, but we don't collect it.
Other advantages, of course, or you wouldn't be there. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
We have an ongoing conversation 5 years now on this podcast about two or three things. One of them is the Middle East. One of them I must apologize to you about. It came the day on the 4th, what was it, Memorial Day, when they had the Indy 500. An Asian driver.
Memorial Weekend, yeah.
An Asian driver won the Indy 500.
And you've been disparaging Asian drivers for as long as that's been. Absolutely have. For all these years. And so right there, put that in your pipe and smoke it, Ralphie, baby.
Right.
An Asian won the Indy 500, and he won't be the last.
And he won't be absolutely not. I stand corrected. Asians drive well.
I told you they can't engineer them and build them without knowing how to drive them.
No, that's silly. they can engineer them just fine. They can't drive them. You know that. But another thing, what do we have disagreements over? We have disagreements over something our buddy mentioned in his talk, our buddy Doc, David Pfister, who's terrific on Facebook, very bright, talked about the Iranians, talked about some of his wishes for the coming year. And one of them brought something up that we discuss, not just in relationship, not just about Iran, about all countries and the people owning up to the responsibility of their leaders, Americans included. Now, do we suffer in terms of terrorism for terrorism towards us brought on the decisions that were brought on by our leaders that we had presumably nothing to do with, their decision to, for instance, invent ISIS by bombing Iraq, this, that, and the other thing.
You mean create, yeah.
Yeah,
the conditions that created ISIS.
Exactly. Don't the Iranians, just as the Germans in Dresden, have some responsibility for the saber-rattling, the propensity to accumulate nuclear weapons, all this? Don't the people of any nation have the responsibility to stand behind what the leaders are doing, or get the leaders out by revolution, by vote, by whatever? If we, the Americans, are suffering from the fear of being blown up in a ballpark or this, that, and the other thing because of what our leaders, Bush, Cheney, those people brought on, don't we in some way, like the people of Dresden, can't they say, well, you just sometimes you just make the wrong decision and you got to suffer for it. I think the time is going to come when Iran is literally going to be leveled and there's going to be a lot of people go down. At what point how much warning do you give the people that they better overthrow these fuckers, or they're going to suffer? This is philosophical. How do you feel about that? What's your stance? Not just Iran, any country, us included.
Well, yeah, you're right to say any country. We've discussed this before. I don't think it's all as easy as that. We're sitting in a coffee shop talking, or sitting on a bar stool talking, or sitting in the library talking, and we really aren't the brains of any outfit. I certainly am not. But I know one thing.
Brains of this outfit, young man.
No.
I'm not saying the bar hasn't been set
I'm supposed
to
feel flattered, but I'm not sure if I do.
I know, but the bar hasn't been set low. I agree, but please feel flattered.
And, come on. Anyway, we're both rowing in a very slow boat, you and I. We're sharing the responsibility for the laboring, or we can commiserate on that level. And here's what I'm saying on that level. I know this. It's not easy to make a revolution, my friend. But the third world countries, almost every single one of them, I mean, it would be hard to find one that hadn't experienced this dynamic.
Well,
the native population resists foreign colonization and loses and gets colonized anyway against its will by an alien but larger, mostly military but also commercial power, and in connivance with some local quislings who go along with it for 30 pieces of silver, if you know what I'm saying, they end up being oppressed and exploited and driven down. But they resist, and a constant tension sets up between those who've been colonized and those who were the colonizers, and their lieutenants that help them rule, what they used to call the house servants on the plantation. They help keep the field servants in line, and every time the field servants get together, and you can name your country, and it's almost always the same dynamic. Every time the field servants get together and try to overcome their exploitation, indeed their oppression, who steps in to stop it? Who steps in to lean hard on them? Who steps in to crush them if the native ruling elites can't handle the job? You see foreign interventions. That's why the United States has bases in 180 countries around the world. Hundreds of bases in almost every country in the world. The majority of countries in the world. And that's to hold people down. That's to keep people from being independent. And usually when they fight for independence, at the same time, they fight for some form of relative democracy compared to the powers they oppose, which are usually despotic, corrupt, authoritarian, even totalitarian, almost always brutal, and undemocratic by any reasonable definition of the term. And so when we want to put the blame on them because they're ruled by tyrants, we have to look closely at each case and examine how many times have they tried to overthrow those tyrants and been put down by those tyrants brutally.
But
a lot of bloodletting.
I'm not just saying the third world countries. I'm talking about we, the people, United States. We are right now being ruled by a tyrant who's taking away our rights, who is indiscriminately making his rich cronies richer by taxing them less and taking that money out of public funding for education.
Oh, that's all true. But beside the point, that doesn't make him a tyrant, by the way.
That becomes tyrannical, doesn't it?
You'd have to define the term for me. That doesn't fit into my lexicon.
Well, if you're taking...
He's a demagogue with authoritarian impulses.
But if you're taking lunch money from your kids, isn't that tyrannical? I mean...
It's unfair. It's nasty. It's no good. It's all kinds of things bad. But it's not tyrannical as I understand it. It's brutal,
causing
but
hunger,
tyrannical.
Causing hunger,
I don't know.
Causing keeping people down because you can't learn if you're hungry.
It's all those things. It's all those things.
All right.
A tyrant usually means, a dictator.
Okay.
And he ain't that because he can't, look at him, he can't get much done, can he? He's meeting opposition all the way up and down this ladder and all the way across the spectrum.
All right. Let's keep some continuity to what we've been talking about in the past few weeks.
Well, let me say this first.
The Russian investigation
wait.
dying. Do you see the Russian investigation dying? Or
hold that thought, because it's getting more complicated and interesting than I can keep up with easily. I'm not keeping up with it well, but I do have some thoughts. But hold it for a second. I want to say this: when you and many others believe that we're ruled by a tyrant, and we have to take responsibility for that, and from observation, if not from direct experience, how difficult it is to wage that fight, even in a relatively open and free society as we're, fortunate enough to live in. That's not an easy job.
Well,
I don't want to take responsibility for Trump. I don't want to take responsibility for foreign aggressions. I don't want to take responsibility for racist immigration policies. I'm against all of that, and so are millions and millions and millions of other people. And they do what they can to oppose those things. Maybe that we could all do more, certainly. But I don't want to take responsibility for that. I don't want to own that. I want to oppose that, loudly proclaim that, and say that's not me, not in my name. And I think the rest of the world, other countries around the world, are in that same boat. Other peoples in other countries around the world. In every country I've ever looked at.
It's so hard to explain what I'm thinking by accepting responsibility for the consequences. We're not owning what he's doing in terms of that's my dogma, that's what I want to do, but because the actions are going to bring on terrorism, as an example. If we're bombed, could we look back and say, well, maybe there was something we could have done more to have prevented a Trump, for instance. And
no, that's true. We could always say that. We can always say that. That's very true.
And I just want to acknowledge what you always say. You cannot fight Republicans with Democrats, and you cannot fight Democrats with Republicans, because basically it's just one big party, and they change the label every couple of years, but it's the same thing. One big system that isn't working. It's a system that sees Bernie Sanders and his wife lawyering up, being indicted on.
Because they're accused of a corrupt land deal or a vacation property deal or something. That is so Bush League compared to what other people are accused and guilty of in those circles.
Right. No question. But they're using campaign money to do it. He certainly takes money from the NRA. He's really, in essence, no different than any politician, because to become a politician, you have to be elected, and what they put you through to be elected and to stay there in terms of serving getting campaign funds and lobbying and this, that, and the other, dealing with lobbyists, it's a no-win situation. The system is broken. Is there anything that you can see down the line? I know you're not a Buckmaster Fuller or whatever it is, but
certainly not.
But change in the basic system where you can look towards something replacing this, something called socialism that doesn't have a name socialism. Because to be a humane society, to be a humane world, there can't be veterans in the street, homelessness. There can't be anybody, kids, anybody else in the street, hungry, homeless, not taken care of, while a few have billions of dollars. A few control 80% of it, and that we're just destined to fail that way, because you say revolution is tough, but if faced with nothing else but hopelessness, revolution is going to come. I'm surprised it hasn't come before. I thought the Occupy movement, which encouraged revolution through banking and the insurance companies and taking your money out of these big banks that screw you and all that, I thought that was going great guns, and it died out. And I don't know, maybe that's another question I have of you. What do you?
That's when Obama ran for president. The election campaign began, and it got routed. The Occupy movement got routed back into support organizations for the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And as the election got going, the Occupy movement sort of dissolved and dissipated its energies into organizing to elect the Democrats to Congress and Senate and presidency.
Okay. So that's what killed it. Well, we saw what that got us.
Well, that was its trajectory. I don't want to be too simplistic, but yeah, that was its trajectory. And same with Bernie. The Bernie supporters are now in different organizations that support the Democratic Party and its candidates, at least on the more liberal side of that spectrum, of that part of the spectrum. But I must say one other thing. I don't know Bernie Sanders takes money from the NRA. I know that he supports the sector.
Oh, he took money. If you Google it, the first thing that comes up in 1990, the NRA helped him get elected to Congress. Okay. And he does take money from the NRA, and that killed him in the New York debate. Hillary started talking about guns that are legal in your state of Vermont coming into New York, and that and being soft on. I
don't believe much of what Hillary says, by the way, without verifying.
No, but she set herself up very well in that debate, which was. That and Debbie Wasserman Schultz were Bernie's downfall, but she also set it up to look as if she were strong on Zionism and Israel, and because he took the stance right from the start of cultivating the Muslim
closer ties with the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And dialing it down and de-escalating the situation if he could.
Right. And that was real sweet, but now we got Trump. And that's basically
America's own Bibi.
Get to the Russian thing. What's happening
there? It's getting the plot thickens. And I'm running out of popcorn. I'm going to have to go for another bucket. Because the movie's, taking twists and turns that weren't necessarily anticipated. There's people who've thought since the beginning, that mostly Democrats, that Trump was something akin to a Manchurian candidate, if you know what I mean, and was having his strings pulled by Vladimir Putin. And he was a political sellout to the Russians, and I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now. The investigations sound like McCarthyism to me. Pardon me, in some respects, and sound like a witch hunt in some respects, and are strong on conclusions and strong on passion and strong on emphasis. The Russians were first said to have hacked, and then the word hack disappeared from the reporters' terminology, and instead the word became interfered. Some kind of nondescript interference was alleged, and the only details I could find in the dailies were allegations that they had used RT television network to put out bad documentaries, propagandistic documentaries on American politics that made Hillary look bad. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not so hard to do. And there's a lot of networks that could be accused of that, or a lot of news productions that could be accused of making Hillary look bad, because that's not a hard thing to do. And so what? Radio Free America and Voice of America, Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, U.S., Uncle Sam, the State Department, the Defense Department, those folks, the spooks, the CIA and so on, the NSA and so on, they've had their communications systems broadcasting and intervening around the world for decades. So for them to make that accusation to me is just like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Everybody's doing it. That's not particularly insidious. And who watches the RT, that's Russia Today? Who watches that network anyway? I don't even have it on my cable system unless I pay a high premium to get it, and I'm not inclined to do that.
Okay.
And so it backpedaled from the Russians hacked to the Russians interfered, and when somebody had the temerity to say, well, precisely how did they interfere, all I got was they put out bad documentaries on RT and a couple of other things of the same caliber that didn't really amount to much and were rather commonplace and expected of governments around the world. Remember, Uncle Sam is a government that mined the telephones of everybody in Brazil and eavesdropped on the telephone calls of their ally and friend, Angela Merkel, and spies on everything. And that's pretty well documented, and it's, even though it was vigorously denied by James Clapper, former CIA director, and others for a time, nowadays people just shrug. It's become accepted. It's common currency. They're spooks. They spy. They conduct espionage. That's what they do. It's their job.
Yeah, but you're tying, the investigation is whether or not Trump's campaign and was involved with the Russians.
True. Whether he was
in Russian, and can you bring Trump into it? Whether or not it's done all the time, this, that, or the other thing.
Well, let me be clear. What I'm saying is done all the time. I don't think Trump did any of that stuff. I could be wrong.
Okay.
They're closing in. I keep hearing reporters go, the investigation is closing in on. They use that kind of language, and I picture in my mind sharks swirling around, and some baby seal in the middle, fighting for its life.
Right.
So it's vivid in the way they describe it. It's lurid. It's spectacular.
Let's be honest. This is a man.
But honestly, I think what they're going to find is financial collusion.
Because he wouldn't stop the investigation. So if there was nothing to investigate, then he wouldn't have fired the head of the FBI for not.
Well, there is something there.
There is something there. That's what I'm asking you. Is it coming close
here's
to
what's
fruition?
there. Here's what's there. No, we don't know because they don't share the details with us. But I'm guessing, based on the way he conducted himself for his whole adult life and the way he makes money, he's a wheeler dealer, he's a casino resort developer, golf course, mogul. He wanted to go to Russia. If his interests are in Russia, they're there to make a deal. And they probably engaged in the kind of chicanery that goes on over there whenever anybody makes a deal on that level. A little bakshish, if you know what I mean. And so that's what they'll find. They'll find some unsavory stuff.
He's dealing as a candidate and as for the United States, for the president.
Well, that's what makes it awkward. That's what makes it awkward. Let's focus on his tweet.
It's like the elephant in the corner. It's a little awkward, yes. You understand that awkwardness.
Sure, it's going to be a little awkward when Joe Biden's family and his family have to explain their connections with Ukraine. They're in thick as thieves with Ukraine. They don't have Trump's money, power, or influence.
He wasn't president at the time.
No, he was vice president. That's a difference, isn't it? It's a qualitative difference.
But see, Congress and elected officials don't have to put their money in trust. They can. That's probably why the system is broken. Congress gets stock traders inside trading deal. That's legal for Congress. None for all Congress.
Well, that's what you'll find. You'll find that kind of chicanery. That's my prediction still, even though it does look like the investigation is gathering force. And there's a lot of smoke, but not a lot of fire, but it's still gathering force, and may at some point stumble onto something that's so embarrassing on some level, mainly financial corruption or something like that. Then they'll say, Eureka, we have found it. But it won't be the kind of political chicanery that you imagine when you watch The Manchurian Candidate or think that Trump is getting coded message from Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin about how to take over America and impose a universal Agenda 21 order on the world.
But
this is what a lot of people think.
You don't have to be guilty of whatever it is you're charged with. You just have to be guilty of the cover-up.
Of course.
And
he could be covering it up because it's going to be awkward for him. He could be trying to stave it off.
Or just the attempt at the cover-up is a crime. You don't even have to do it well.
I know. They might get him on that. When they can't get him on the actual crime, they get him on conspiracy or obstruction of.
Well, what if the actual crime is obstruction of justice? If the worst, it's like with Pete Rose, the cover-up and the lies.
Listen, do you hear what you're saying? If indeed, as I believe, the charge of political corruption or that Donald Trump is somehow colluding with the Kremlin politically, if that's totally bogus, and I think it is, but somebody has enough social and political power, mainly the Democratic Party, to mount an investigation at great public expense and beat the drum and try to stand and generate enough buzz to keep this thing going, like hot embers under the man's feet. Wait a minute. Let me finish. They're like hot embers under the man's feet, and then the man screams, "Ouch, ouch, ouch," and tries to stop it, and does something totally human by saying, "Come on, James, can't you lay off Flynn? He's a good guy." I don't doubt that happened. That could easily have happened, but that's not high treason.
Well, it is.
That's not a capital crime.
It may not be capital crime, but if you get him, it wasn't a capital crime. It wasn't high treason for Clinton to get a blowjob, and they still impeached him. So you don't have to.
But you want to go down that road again?
They should not have done that, and that was money. Of course, that was ridiculous. But yet,
but it was fun to watch.
The man who can get a blowjob from a Jewish woman, you got to tell you that.
Power is the strongest aphrodisiac, we're told.
That did it then. Well, I knew it must have been something. Listen, it's always the cover-up. It was the cover-up that really got Nixon. Had Nixon said, "Yeah, we broke into the offices. I didn't do it personally, of course, but I'll tell you what, these Germans that run my office, Himmelstein and that guy, they're the ones that are going to take the
Ehrlichman and Haldeman.
Ehrlichman, it all would have gone away.
I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. When the Democrats had their offices burglarized, they would have exacted revenge. Because unlike Trump, Nixon committed political crimes, betraying the Constitution and so forth, so on and so forth. He committed a felony. He commissioned a felony against a loyal opposition. If it had been some remote third party marginalized, it would have been another matter. But this was the largest party in America, and he burglarized them. They had to respond. They had to get rid of him. Or else why conduct the charade at election time? Why, that whole charade becomes transparent at that point. Doesn't matter. Because they're going to burglarize you and steal your stuff and do whatever it takes to cheat you out of a legitimate result.
He didn't need it to win the election.
Well, I know. The paranoia is greater than the actual threat.
Exactly.
But unlike Trump, Nixon committed high crimes.
One cannot say I was wrong, I made a mistake, I screwed up, boom, accept my apology. Well, people cannot say that. In the smallest of dealings, in the smallest of interactions, people have to go down defending their position for the rest of their lives. And,
the impulse to cover up starts early. I observed it in my daughter when we were potty training her. And I asked myself, why would she lie about whether or not she flushed the toilet or cleaned up afterwards and pretend that she had when she clearly hadn't? And she was 3 years old, and she was covering up in front of me in a blatant falsehood. And I asked myself mentally, where does this come from? Is this instinct? Did I somehow, as a parent, imbue this in her inadvertently? Have she caught me in a whopper in front of her that a 3-year-old could comprehend? I didn't think any of those things. I finally had to realize it comes from something in the limbic system in your brain, the reptile part of your brain. You have to suppress it because if it's not used with a lot of discretion, it easily gets out of control and you become a rampant liar. You have to somehow fortify yourself against it and use it with great caution. But I think it goes all the way, it's some kind of what we might call instinct by now. And Nixon definitely did engage in a cover-up, and that was a separate crime. That was real. But originally, he committed the offense that he was charged with. He was guilty. Trump, I don't think he's colluded with the Russians politically. I just think he probably paid bribes or laundered money or did something. Or maybe not even that dramatic and spectacular.
Unholy Trinity money that he played, big business, government, whoever he paid bribes to, the government, and in this case, you could just say Putin, had to have been,
or his friends
somewhere, or his cronies had to have 100% chance of that, been in on that. They don't have business. They don't have it here. You don't think governments in the way of taxes or bribes or lobbyists or anything else? Don't you think government benefits from business and vice versa? Had to be there. I know it's a hard pill to swallow for those of us who don't want to see disruption in a system that, although it really doesn't work, we don't have anything. That's what I was asking you. Is there anything in place? Is there anything that anybody has? A utopia? Something? They wrote the book 1984 way back when. Anybody have any views that you respect for what can come of all this? If there is a revolution, which doesn't have to be one that's a physical guns-a-tootin' revolution, but people could stop investing in the system. They could stop going to the voting booths. They could stop putting money in the collection plate.
You mean passive forms of resistance might overcome evil?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Gandhi furnishes a modern-day example of civil disobedience, a passive form of resistance Although, some reactionaries might say, no, they got violent, but generally speaking, no, they didn't. But I don't think that it focused a lot of attention on the issue of colonialism in India. But I really think there were other factors that weighed heavily on the British decision to pull out and turn its empire into a commonwealth. It was just too damned expensive, as the Romans learned, to maintain, occupy, and police an empire bigger than your own resources would allow you to do affordably.
Yeah, but
so that passive resistance
we have
180
million bases around the country, around the world, in every country in the world. So can't that become someday too expensive? And has it already become too expensive?
I think so. Let's look at that, what they're having to cut to pay for it. And what you mean, we, Bellface? You and I don't have any bases. Let's get that clear. Nobody listening to this has any bases anywhere, military bases anywhere. And we don't have any say in it either, except in the most remote and attenuated way through the electoral process. That's mostly a diversion and a distraction and a charade.
Oh, as I can tell you, having participated in the primaries for Bernie, and when Debbie Wasserman Schultz indiscriminately decided to turn and this was proven in emails that were later discovered, and her hand was slapped, and she's now a congressperson. And
did she get elected to something? Oh,
yeah, she did.
I haven't followed her.
Unbelievably. Okay, I mean, on so
maybe she can deliver. She knows the people with their hands on the lever of power, and you need your street paved or whatever.
Oh yeah, whatever.
You need your zoning permit variation. I'm your gal.
No, I don't. I'll have to go back and look where she is right now. I blank on it, but she came out none the worse for wear, and eventually it's going to come down to it. She was the one that made a direct difference in getting Trump elected. I think Bernie
by tilting the table in favor of Hillary.
Bernie would have won head-to-head against Trump. They both wanted the same thing. They wanted a change in a system that wasn't working. Trump's philosophy was maniacal and not well thought out. He's a crazy man. He's going to implode.
So let's be careful when we say that Bernie and Trump wanted the same thing. They both wanted a change, but the devil's in the details.
That's what I mean. No, they certainly didn't want it in the same changes, but
same kind of change.
Same kind of changes. And Bernie would have appealed. He didn't have Hillary's baggage, and he would have appealed to the American people as Uncle Bernie and things. Once they get part, everybody would have gone to a Seder, and they would have had the tip of the genitals cut off, of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
Oh, I got to tell you something. Ralph. You just reminded me of something. I got demoralized the other day. I ran into somebody up here, a young person, because I'm normally very optimistic about young people. I really admire them. But this case, I don't know how much of it has to do with geography or the generation itself or the times we live in. It's probably a combination of all those and more. This guy believes in the Freemasons as a conspiracy, the Illuminati, and he believes that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is an authentic document, not a forgery.
Huh.
Do you know what that is? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion? You ever heard of it?
I must say I haven't.
Back in the 1800s, late 1800s, I think, and maybe early 1900s, the Russian Tsarist Empire was, decaying rapidly. It didn't have long to live. It was a feudal order in Eastern Europe, but part of Europe, that was still locked in absolutism of a feudal nature. The Tsar had, nearly absolute powers until February of 1917. And his court was composed of Russian nobles, often called boyars, who were princes that managed feudal estates and lived off the labor of their serfs, who had only been legally liberated from serfdom, but still living in abject poverty and servitude. They had been legally liberated from serfdom in 1865. So not very long had they been free, quote unquote, from their servile feudal obligations to their lords and masters, which usually involved working as hard as you can from dawn to dusk during harvest and sowing season, and then handing half of it over to that parasite who lives in the castle and high on the hill, because he's your lord and master, and that's the divinely ordained order. So these nobles in Russian aristocracy under the Tsar were extremely anti-Semitic as a body. A lot of the pogroms against the Jewish shtetls in Eastern Europe and Russia were sponsored or condoned or encouraged or fostered, at the very least sympathized with, by these aristocratic Russian nobles. And a group of them fabricated a document. It's a total counterfeit, imaginary list of protocols, rules, procedures that the elders of Zion, whoever the hell that is, were alleged to have promulgated to Jewish people around the world. And it involved their ritual sacrifices, blood sacrifices, and all kinds of real scandalous stuff, lurid stuff that I think even you wouldn't find in the National Enquirer, gutter stuff. And it was never created or written or published by any Jewish organization or institution ever. It was a total fabrication of the Russian nobility. But a lot of people who believe that the Freemasons are behind everything that's going wrong with the New World Order coming on and all that stuff, or who think the Illuminati, the so-called Illuminati, are the secret power behind everything, and the Rothschilds are the family that leads them, they believe this business, this bullshit about the protocols of the elders of Zion. The whole world knows it's a fabricated, counterfeit document, except these guys. And some of them live among us up here. That was sad.
I'll tell you what, that's as scary as anything Jewish as I've heard since my grandmother's chopped liver. Which, Next show, you could tell me a little bit more about the Rothschilds. I want to end this one by your giving me your take on the medical situation. For one payer, are they going to overthrow the Obamacare? Do they have a system in place to do so? If I had insurance based on having Obamacare right now and nothing else, should I be worried?
Hell yeah. Hell yeah, be worried. No, because there was a couple of good things about Obamacare in that it at least partially increased the pool of insured by a significant amount so that fewer people were uncovered for medical expenses. And they were able to get insurance.
Preconditions.
That was another thing that was a welcome reform, but miserly. It said, yeah, if your kid is under 26 and still living with you, you can keep them on the plan. That's just a frank acknowledgement that in this day and age, young people's economic situation is so precarious that many of them cannot afford to live on their own. And they're economically forced to remain part of a household under their parents. And the kind of jobs they are able to get generally don't provide adequate medical coverage or insurance for medical coverage. So, okay, that's making the law conform to the reality partially, in some respect. It's more like a genuflection in that direction. Instead of completely solving the problem, it throws some coins out of the limousine window and watches people scrap for them, elbowing each other aside, trying to get what they can while the limo drives on with a trunk full of cash. And to that extent, that some of us, alms seekers, were able to get coverage when we weren't able to before, that's a welcome reform. But it's a modest one. And I'd be very worried if I was somebody in that age group who found coverage, thank goodness, under Obamacare, and is now contemplating what's going to happen when the new Republican health care bill gets signed by the new Republican president.
Well, does the new
Republican-dominated
health care bill provide
Congress
for pre-existing conditions?
As we speak?
Yeah.
Some, but not others. I don't know the details. They're still working that out. There's horse trading going on as we speak, because I've read that the Republicans wanted to have the thing considered in Congress and passed today, the last day of this session. And it doesn't look like it's going to happen because they can't get enough Republicans to agree to sign it.
Okay, and then, of course, it has to go to the Senate, which won't happen.
I think we're behind, Ralph. I think it's gone through the lower house, and the Senate has its own version of the same bill, and they have to reconcile the two. And that's the stage it's in. And
okay.
Maybe the Senate still has to vote, but I believe the House of Representatives has already voted. It's the Senate that still has to vote, and they have their own version, which in some respects I've heard is a little bit better, marginally better, in terms of coverage and so on, but in some respects is worse, because down the road it makes deeper cuts into Medicaid and things like that.
Okay, I'll just ask you one more question to define single payer for me and my audi.
Single payer really is 339 million payer, or however many people live in this country. It means everybody pays for everybody. We also, if the larger insurance pools are more economically sustainable, because the more healthy people who pay the dues and don't use the services and don't drain the assets from the program, the more you spread out that coverage to them, the more they sign on, the better the coverage is. And single payer means everybody's in the same pool, from sea to shining sea. And it's expanding the pool, making it one national insurance pool where the public manages
because
it.
Because of its socialistic similarities?
It could be a monopoly corporate model. Kaiser from sea to shining sea. That's private.
Okay.
But it could be universal. Or it could be a public model like the National Health Service in Britain once was, if it isn't still today. Or it could be, even want to go further, in the socialist countries, it was a nationalized healthcare system, which we used to like to make fun of, but damn, it's better that everybody be covered than not. And they had that going for them. There's a whole lot they didn't have going for them, but they definitely had that going for them. That's the most humane operative principle. Everybody's covered automatically as a right, not even of citizenship, but as a human right. That's single payer.
That's very well explained. Appreciate it, Scott. Thank you for being here as usual, and we will catch up really soon to you and everybody out there. I've got to tell you what I say at the end of most of my podcasts. Keep your dreams wet. Keep your I don't know, how did I say? I've been saying this for 5 years.
Powder dry?
Keep your dreams wet, keep your humor dry, keep your kids out of military recruiting stations, and your grandkids too. Mm-hmm. It'll kill you. It'll kill the family.
All right.
And keep your kids off the laps of recruiters off the laps of clerics that wear dresses. My God, 5 years saying the same thing, I couldn't get it out. But if you say all those four things, everything will be much better. It couldn't be worse for us all. Thank you, Scott. You teach me.
Hey, on that same note, thank you. Maybe next time we'll know more about what's going to happen with this treasurer from the Vatican who's going to go back to Australia and face charges. Molesting minors.
After all, the man frolicked. Yeah, I mean,
we don't know that. We don't know that. We know that it wouldn't surprise us if he did, because plenty have. And talking about cover-up, if you look up cover-up in the dictionary, it's got a picture of the Vatican under the definition. But
absolutely.
Next time we talk, there'll be more to say about that, because that's breaking news as we speak.
Beautiful. Thanks, Scott. Talk to you.
All right.
Really
Talk
soon.
to you soon.
Say hi at home and be well.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Adios, everybody.